I'm Paul Myers from the Paul and John, and you're on BackstageAxxess.com, where the real show begins.
Rise and shine so bright, chase away the cool blue morning light.
All right, hello everyone, this is Tom Jennings from BackstageAxxess.com. Very excited. We got a great guest today that I'm going to be able to interview. I've actually been on Rundgren Radio with this guy a couple of times, and we've always had a good time. And I reached out to him when he sent me a copy of his latest project, which is called The Paul and John, and the album title is Inner Sunset. Great album. It was started with a Kickstarter campaign, and just a lot of groovy stuff. And his gentleman's name is Paul Myers. You might recognize the last name. He's got a famous brother, which will probably come up in conversation, but we'll leave that for a little bit later. But Paul's been around. He was in a group called the Gravelberries out in Canada, and he's written some phenomenal books. One that I shared with Elliot Lewis of Hall & Oates fame from Live at Daryl's House about Todd Rundgren. But I digress. Let's start with the Paul and John project. Paul, you are the Paul.
Hey, how you doing? Hi.
I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. It's I'm in Northern California, and the weather's nice right now. We sometimes get a little cloudy. We've had kind of a cold summer, but it's also been a dry summer, and we're kind of hoping for rain and or some nice weather either way. But and I didn't get caught in the earthquake, so that's cool. The earthquake was further north than us, so I'm okay.
Well, before we get into Inner Sunset, I want to talk about the other Paul, because you did a lot of posting on Facebook about this, but you just had a chance to see Paul McCartney. You want to share that experience?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to get a ticket to see Paul McCartney at Candlestick Park, and if you know anything about the Beatles story, you know that the Candlestick Park venue was the site of the last ever Beatles live show. So they're demolishing Candlestick Park, so they held on until Paul McCartney could play there one last time, and then they basically just started dismantling it right after the show. So it was a very interesting evening. Anyway, it's always an interesting evening to see Paul McCartney because his band is amazing. He is amazing. I mean, I don't know whether he's 72 or something. I should know those things, but he's amazing. Like he still sings it really hard for 3 hours straight, and of course you know all the songs. And what I really think he should be proud of is that it's not just digging to the Beatles material. When he pulls out stuff from Wings and the Band on the Run era and stuff like that, like he can pull out Paul McCartney's solo songs that are just as identifiable as his Beatles stuff, and yet he still plays a great deal of the Beatles stuff, including like stuff like Dean for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, which the Beatles never played live because that was in the era when they weren't doing live anymore. And they were really studio-y songs, but now with the technology, you can actually go on stage and play, a reasonable version of those records. And so it's pretty great. And the staging's really wonderful and simple. And McCartney, for all the things that McCartney could be at this age, like he could be egotistical, arrogant, whatever, he's aware that he's like a god among pop songwriters, but he doesn't ever act like he's better than you. He just knows that you are interested in his career because he's in fact the Beatles. Like it's kind of like you kind of don't begrudge him for knowing that he's Paul McCartney, but he's not acting weird about it or anything. Like kind of amazing. I don't think there's anyone like him. Maybe Springsteen, but I don't know. It's amazing.
Yeah, it is interesting you mentioned Springsteen and McCartney. I mean, these are guys that play 3-hour shows. I don't know how many live shows that you go to, but boy, a lot of these acts, you get an hour 15 minutes out of them. They're half of McCartney's age and probably half Springsteen's age. It's kind of disheartening in that respect. But boy, it's pretty amazing to see a guy like McCartney just stand there for 3 hours. Because you know what, an hour and a half of Paul McCartney, people would still pay hundreds of dollars for it. Yeah,
no, it's true. And to be fair to the younger acts, maybe they don't have more than an hour and 15 minutes of music, that could work, So, I mean, McCartney's got a tight 3 hours, and you still think, oh my God, he didn't play Jet. like I can't believe after 3 hours, I said to my brother who was with me, I said, like, oh my God, 3 hours, and he didn't even play Jet. Jet's one of my favorite Wings songs, or actually I think it was just Paul McCartney, but anyway, it was like, I don't know if that was technically a Wings album, but anyway, he's just great, and we got to meet him, which is like kind of neat, because I was there, frankly, through my brother. It was like VIP tickets, so it was pretty cool to be in that environment. But even more interesting, well, not even more interesting, it'd be as interestingly, I got to meet the band, who I've been following that band. But, this band that McCartney has been with him longer than any band he's ever had, including the Beatles. I think this band has been together for something like 12 to 13 years, maybe even 14 years. I think their first gig with this lineup was around the time of the 9/11 concert. So that's at least 13 years. So
yeah, and he's put together some great bands. I mean, that Trippin' Alive, fantastic. That group, I think he's like Hamish Stewart from the Average White Band and all that. I mean, that was a great lineup too. But yeah, these guys really do well.
That lineup. That's the last lineup I saw in '93. I saw him at the Sky Dome in Toronto, but I also saw, I was lucky to see him on Saturday Night Live, because my brother used to be on Saturday Night Live. It's funny, I wasn't going to talk about Mike the whole time, but these are important. This is where it comes in, is like, one of the best things about having a celebrity brother. I mean, it's great most of the time, sometimes it's not, but the main thing is, like, when Mike was on Saturday Night Live, the musical guest was Paul McCartney in '93, and I went to see that show, and it was just amazing. We got to, I got to sit on the floor, sit in the seats that are on the shop floor of Saturday Night Live, so 8H, right in front of the band, and Studio 8H, and he did like Hey Jude, and it was pretty amazing. It was slow, but that was the band with Robbie McIntosh from the Pretenders. Sorry. Yeah, Hamish Stewart from the Average White Band, and Wicks, the keyboard player, is still the same keyboard player. He's been playing keyboards for Paul McCartney for probably 30 years.
Wow. Wicks Wickens, right? That's his name?
Yeah, they just call him Wicks, W-I-X.
Yeah.
And the drummer for McCartney now is Abe Laboriel Jr., this gentle giant. He's like this big Goliath of a drummer who just sings like an angel. He's got a high voice. He does all the high harmonies that, maybe McCartney or Linda did in the old days, but McCartney's out there singing lead, so who's doing the high harmony? Abe Laboriel Jr., and he's just an amazing drummer, very commanding presence, and I got to meet him backstage too this time, and what a guy. It turns out he kind of knew me from Twitter, which is kind of neat, like, because I know Brian Ray, the guitar player, from Twitter, and we'd never actually met. We'd just been tweeting each other for like 3 years. And so finally we did a lot with what they call a tweet up, when you meet somebody you only know from Twitter and you actually take a picture, because it's like, how rare is it that we're in the same room? So we did a tweet up with Brian Ray and a tweet up with Abe Laboriel, and of course I met Rusty Anderson, the guitar player, too, and Wicks, and it was really great. It was really great to meet those guys, because those guys helped McCartney put that show on, and they're all good people too. I think McCartney's got a good crew of like sound-minded people who are good at their job, So it's really good.
So is it safe to say, the Paul and John, obviously the name is inspired from the Beatles?
It's not actually. Can I just jump right in and say the funniest thing, and the thing we kind of like kicked ourselves afterwards, because we didn't realize everyone would see that. Like, you're not the only person who said that, and we really do like the Beatles, and we really do like the idea of pop songcraft, but honest to God, we were just doing this thing. I'm Paul Myers, he's John Mormon, and we were trying to do a thing. We were going to call it Mormon and Myers. We were going to call it Myers and Mormon. We were going to call it, Paul Myers and John Mormon. Like, we weren't sure what we were going to call it, and then I said, why don't we call it Paul and John? And then, I don't know why I didn't even think of the Beatles, and then I said, for fun, let's call it The Paul and John, like as if that's a band name, The Paul and John. And it'd just be one of those dumb things that you do, you add a the to something, and so we thought more people would be like fixated on the part, and they wouldn't even notice, and then almost immediately people said, oh, is it like a tribute? In fact, I think some people don't listen to our record because they think it's a cover band. And I've had a few people say, hey, do you want to listen to my record, The Paul and John? And they're honestly surprised that it's not Mersey beat covers, you know? Like, and we don't mind people associating us with the Beatles, but my God, we certainly didn't go out there and say, you know, here we are, tribute to the Beatles, and we're dumb. I agree, we're dumb for calling ourselves the Paul and John. Like, it's not the best thing to do if you're trying to avoid that.
Well, the funny thing is I thought that was the joke because, you know, the Paul and John would be Paul McCartney and John Lennon. So I thought that you were kind of saying, oh, we're the Paul and John, you know.
Oh my God, well, that's good. I like that, but it's not what we had in mind. But still, as long as the people don't not listen to the band because they think we're just kidding or something, you know, because we're very serious about the songs. Like we don't mind not taking ourselves seriously. The songs we wrote together for this record, Inner Sunset, they're like 4 years of, it's basically a songwriting club that John and I were doing, and we got together. We're both in other things, and I do my, you know, you mentioned I write books and I do other things, so we're not really in the same place all the time, but when we get together to write songs, we write, you know, we wrote about 40 to 50 songs for this album, and the album's only got 10 songs on it because we kept saying, that song doesn't fit with this song. This song here is really great, so let's have one more like that. So these are all the best of like 4 years. You know, it's like an anthology. It's like the greatest hits album for us. It's like the best 10 songs from 4 years of writing songs together. So I like that, by the way, because, you know, no one cares if we put a record out, so we had the luxury of time to make sure it was all the way we wanted it, you know? So yeah, the weirdest thing would be if this record suddenly took off or something and we had to, like, quickly knock out 10 more. I wonder what would happen. I wonder if we'd still be able to write 50 songs and pare it down to 10, you know? But anyway.
Well, it's a very, very strong album, you know, and I noticed on Facebook, you know, you were holding up a Beach Boys album for this Music Cares project that's going on.
The Music Cares Challenge for Music Cares is the ASCAP. I mean, excuse me, it's the Recording Academy. You know, the people who do the Grammys. They have a charity outreach. Just so your listeners know what that is. Hashtag Music Cares Challenge on Twitter, and you'll find it.
And you know, but you hear that, I mean, I really hear that kind of layering, that beautiful, I mean, that was the thing about the Beach Boys that I think people forget because they think of the singles and everything like that. But really, some of the stuff they did in the studio was just absolutely breathtaking. And you really capture some very nice layers of sound. I mean, it's just a very pleasant album to listen to. I don't know if that's the type of feedback that you're getting from other people.
Yeah, no, actually, and thank you. I mean, I'm not going to say that everybody says that, but I appreciate it when people do say it. I will tell you straight up that the vocal thing, what typifies my favorite records, and I realize this because I'm a huge fan of, like, okay, so Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys is known for his great vocal arranging and his great layering of the voices of his cousin and his brothers. And then inversely, you've got the Beatles with George Martin arranging and you know, and the band all arranging too. Like, and McCartney's solo stuff has that great vocal arrangement thing. And then you've got Todd Rundgren is another big hero of mine. And I will say this, as a guy who grew up listening to Todd Rundgren records and kind of knowing that part of a great deal of the time on Todd Rundgren records, except for the Utopia records, it's usually all Todd layering his own voice, right? So, and there's a sound that he gets when he layers himself on an album like Hermit of Make Hollow, where he's singing all the parts, and there's this blend that you get and his choices of notes. So I was really into that. And when I wrote the book, A Wizard of True Star, Todd Rundgren in the Studio, I spent hours talking to Todd Rundgren about what he did. And I talked to all the bands he worked with about how Todd had influenced them and what, you know, what. And the thing that kept coming back was Todd is like a demon for a great guy for arranging. Like he's a natural. He's a genius of arranging vocals. And so the weirdest thing happened, and I'm not kidding, when I started like working with John and Alan Clapp, who's our co-producer on this record, I kept saying, I think I said it out loud a couple of times. I said, what would Todd do? Like the harmony here. Like, how would we, you know, like, I know what Todd would do. He'd have the oohs and ahs come in here, and then they'd lay out here, and then there'd be a lone voice here, and then hold back so that when the big voices come in later, it feels really huge and heavenly. And so the Todd way was in my head. And so Todd and Brian Wilson and George Martin and Paul McCartney, all those guys are informing me, and Laura Nero and all these people. And it's like, it's really amazing that it comes through it all, but it's like I'm really, really happy with that aspect of Inner Sunset.
Oh yeah, it definitely comes through, and it's interesting. Before I even read on read about the album, as far as a single, when you hear the song "Everything Comes Together," it really pops out as a single, and in kind of that sort of spirit, like you said. I mean, even if you go back to some of when Todd was really concerned with singles, even though I don't know if he ever really was, that would be a song. The song would kind of pop out, and that one, and it's early on in the album, kind of like I Saw the Light on Something Anything, bam, in your face, first one, and then it sets the stage for a great album. But you also do this kind of neat thing too, where you tie everything together with the Inner Sunrise, Inner Sunset, and Inner Sundown, which album art, isn't that kind of a lost art these days?
Well, yeah, and that's another Todd Rundgren influence. Todd's really a big guy about what I call reverse engineering a concept. Okay, so he would get an artist and he would work with the artist and they would have a bunch of songs and they'd have a certain perspective on the world, and he would tell the artist or suggest to the artist that their lyrics need to be more this way, that way, and focus so that they would have a statement. So each album is like a book. Each album is like a yearbook of a certain mindset, right? And I like that in artists. You can tell when an artist wrote a bunch of songs together, although we are often fooled. We find out later that the Rolling Stones albums were made up of sessions from different sessions, and we didn't realize that they didn't just record all these albums at once, But still, so the Todd thing was that lyrically, in fact, there's a direct lineage to another favorite band of mine is XTC, and of course, when Todd Rundgren produced Skylarking for XTC, the original concept for that album was a day, and it was called Day Passes. And they were working on this idea that it would start with what's the first album, Summer's Cauldron, which is a song about sort of the sun waking up, and and then the end of the album is like dying. It was a song called Dying and Sacrificial Bonfire, and it's all over at the end. And Todd was the main driver of that. He would tell Andy Partridge and Colin Moulding that this song works, that song works, this one doesn't fit this set. Apparently there's a whole other bunch of songs that just were like political, about Northern Ireland and things, and they were all cut from the lineup for this album because Todd wanted it to have a cohesive, thematic, lyrical thing. And so I was lucky that John Mormon does not really care about writing lyrics, and that he speaks highly of my lyric writing ability. So he entrusted me to write all the lyrics for all the songs, which was great because when we were like stuck for a certain song and it didn't really have lyrics that worked yet, I would say, well, since this song is going to be on the album, why don't we make this song be the song that has this lyrical moment in it? So we quickly wrote the Inner Sundown. We'd had Inner Sunset because that's the area we worked in. We were in the city in San Francisco. There's an area called the Inner Sunset District because there's the Outer Sunset, there's the Inner Richmond, the Outer Richmond, and all that stuff. And I thought it was really trippy to call an album Inner Sunset, so we kind of worked it backwards that way. But I wanted to have a song like Inner Sundown, so I wrote a little folk song, and then John wrote this guitar section that comes right after the folk song at the end of Inner Sundown, and then I added the sort of big wash of vocals to it. So it was like we created this little goodnight song, and we called it Inner Sundown because it's like thematic, so the sunrise song, and then everything comes together, which is about waking up in the morning, and then we go through the day, and then it's not literal all the way. It's not every moment of the day. Sometimes it's just events that happen in the day, but then definitely we wanted it to end with sundown, So yeah, it was, again, we tried really hard to make this a complete statement, including the photographs on the album. I'd taken hundreds of photographs of sunsets with my iPhone, and the one we ended up using was actually one of a blurred car headlight with a little bit of the sunset in it, because I wanted it, Alan and I, who designed the album cover, we wanted it to be that the sunset was inside the album. Like when you open it up, you'll see the sunset. Even on the vinyl's great because there's a big gatefold shot of a sunset in the street. But on the CD, you can still see it. When you take the CD out of the tray, there's the sunset behind the CD. So it's thematic, it's conceptual, and all that I owe to Todd Rundgren.
Wow.
Sorry, my answers are really long because I was talking. But you know what? You did ask.
Well, we're both huge Todd Rundgren fans. I mean, that's actually what brought us together in the first place. But yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, I guess I heard more Beach Boys than I heard Todd, but I guess conceptually that all makes sense. And I would assume that since you said you were working on this for 4 years, that some of this would have coincided with the time that you were working on the book.
Well, yeah, like literally. 4 years ago, I would have just been doing the final draft on it, or I had just handed in the final draft. So yeah, and I mean, definitely, it was all fresh in my head. So and I think the best part is it wasn't just like remembering the rules that Todd laid down. It was more like I was just aware of how one producer could solve certain problems, and so I went about my business that way. I and it was a large influence that way. So it was a deep influence.
And the song "Everything Comes Together," just to get back to that, because it's just such a wonderful song. I mean, it's tough, obviously, to get airplay because airplay doesn't even really exist except on satellite radio on some levels. Maybe it's different in San Francisco than it is out in the Buffalo, New York area. But this is a song I could see that would make a nice spot in a movie or something like that. Is that something you would even try to do as far as marketing this album, or is this more of a kind of an artistic venture and just appreciating the people that appreciate it?
I would love songs to be used in movies, if that's your question. Yeah, I mean, for one thing, the movies and TV are the new radio. In terms of, if someone wanted to use Everything Comes Together in a Target ad or something like that, it wouldn't be so horrible for me. It would be, I've had friends who actually had their music used in Target ads and in iPod ads or iTunes ads, and it doesn't seem as weird as it used to seem when I was younger and I would hear, I think it's weird. If it's a jingle and a band is like doing something that's for a product that they don't clearly like or that is really bad for you, and it's a band you trusted. Like if Springsteen was to go up there and sing, I like Joe Cola because it makes me feel all itchy, and you'd be like, wow, really, Bruce? But if I don't know, it seemed to me like Bob Seger, Like a Rock GM, does not seem so out of character for me. As much as maybe that song could have. Maybe using the actual song kind of cheapens it for people who like the song. I think, especially when it's just musical, like when someone just uses a bit of your music in an ad, I don't know, it's not bad. And people always ask now, everybody can Shazam, right? Shazam on the iPhone, or probably on I use it on my iPhone, people can use it on other platforms. Oh my God, I mean, I'm always grabbing the Shazam and so who's that song on that TV show? They might play 30 seconds, so you freeze, go back and rewind it and check it again. And then you end up either buying the record, or at least you know who that artist is, so that you hear another one of theirs, you go, okay, now I've heard 2 songs by that artist, I really like that artist. And you might not hear that artist any other way. The HBO TV shows, I've met so many great music. I've met so much good music from hearing them at the outro credits of The Wire or The Sopranos, or just a song will be used for 30 seconds in The Sopranos or Mad Men or something, and I'm like, wow, that's a really good song. Now, Mad Men use a lot of retro stuff, so it's not the same, but I mean, there's a lot of new music being used in True Blood and things like that, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, Group Love is somebody I discovered through that iTunes commercial. Really good band. It turns out the drummer was Trevor Rabin, the guitarist of Yes's son, which was kind of cool. I found out later. But yeah, Baby Blue from. I mean, that song made it back on the charts just because of an inclusion on a television show. It's a great song,
It's funny. When that happened, I remember, because now I am sort of connected to Todd and Michelle Rundgren, I remember, I just sent them an email, while that was happening, while Baby Blue was playing on the last episode of Breaking Bad, it was the last minute of Breaking Bad, and I said, I guess they knew, right? They must have known it was being licensed, but they seemed as surprised as anyone with the way it was used, I think, because it was pretty climactic, not to spoil it for anyone who still plans to see the show. But it was, let's just say that, I mean, I can't believe you haven't seen it if you're listening to this, but if you are ever going to watch Breaking Bad from beginning to end. There's a beautiful climax involving a song from Badfinger that Todd Rundgren produced, and it's such a great moment, and it's probably one of the top 10 uses of the song. Also, because it was such a weird song to pull out Badfinger is another one of my favorite bands, and they pull that out in that gritty, edgy show about meth dealers, meth makers in New Mexico. It seemed so weird to me to hear Badfinger suddenly in that moment, but it made me happy. It made me really happy, like that, because I wrote for that kind of music, and I'm always happy when that happens.
Yeah, I definitely hear the Badfinger influence too on this album. One last song we'll chat about on this one, then I'll hit a couple topics and let you go finally. But Can't Be Too Careful. Just love that song. It's just got such a great, I don't know what it is. It's a song that I have to turn up when I hear it. Is that kind of by design?
We wanted to mix it. We wanted to mix it like you were at a rock concert, and that song where there's always a song where like the band's changing guitars and the drummer starts early on purpose, so the drummer just starts pounding time. John, by the way, plays all the drums. Like, we played all the instruments on that record, so I played the bass and John plays the drums, and we both are guitarist singers. Like, that's our main thing, is guitar and singing. And then, but for the bed tracks, I would play the bass and he would play the drums. So everything on the record has this uniformity or cohesion that you can only get by it being all you. And so John just does like this open drum thing, and then I play like the sort of 80s style bass behind him, and then the song, I think that song, I wanted a song that had the same vibe as a Cheap Trick song to me. Like I just wanted the chorus to be, you can't be too careful. I thought that would be something that Robin Zander would sing, and then the message of the song is kind of interesting too, because I like the duality of the expression, you can't be too careful, because in life you can be so careful that you don't make any mistakes and you never learn. So you can't be too careful, but then the other expression people say, you can't be too careful with these things, so on the other hand, you got to be careful, but you can't be too careful. And so I wanted it to be kind of like a song about how sometimes being warned off of danger can be a little too limiting. And so that's what the song's all about, nothing gets done living under the gun, fearing risk, never reaping reward, Like, I really wanted to say it straight. I was about teachers make a mess trying to do what's best, giving you the safest advice.
I love that line. I just love that line.
But that's, I was with someone once, and it was a young parent, and she had 2 young children, and we were walking on a hill somewhere that had a steep drop-off, and it wasn't the worst steep drop-off, but she was so worried about her daughters falling off the edge that she was clutching them really tightly. And I couldn't tell if those kids knew that they should be afraid or not. And I understand the parental instinct to keep them from falling, but I was worried that those kids would then be scared the next time they were anywhere without their mom. It's not my business, so I didn't say anything, and I really can't even judge, right? But I remember making a note. I wonder if my parents made me afraid of something that I didn't need to be afraid of because they were trying to help me. They're doing the best they could, but they gave me safe advice, and it's the safe advice I had to learn that maybe, inversely, to name drop a little bit, I was talking to Don Was, the producer, because I did a book with a band that was working with Don Was, and Don Was is a great producer, and he was in the middle of the interview. He says, I got to take this call. It's from the doctors. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. So he takes the call, and he comes back to me and goes, yeah, my son's in the hospital with a broken leg. I said, oh, I'm sorry. Do you need to go? And he goes, no, it's fine. He's doing fine. He was swinging on this swing, and I said, oh, man, you almost want to get rid of the swings. He goes, no, he had to learn, right? That's what he said. Had to learn. He'll learn not to jump off the swings at 6 feet high, and he'll break his leg again. And I said, but you don't want him to suffer. He goes, no. He goes, I just don't want him to. I just don't want to keep him from learning that he can break his leg. I don't want to be trying so hard to protect him that he never learns that he's going to break his leg if he does that stuff. He goes, I don't want him to hurt his head. But it was a really beautiful moment, because he was basically telling me that, yeah, I care about him, but kids are going to break their legs. kids are going to get cut sometimes. You know, like try not to make it bad, try not to make it fatal, but like you got to learn.
Well,
it's cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. You know, it's interesting. We can almost turn that into kind of a little bit of a mini Todd Rundgren discussion, because Todd was never a guy that was worried about the commercial success, and he was willing to throw stuff out that maybe he broke a musical leg here and there. And I think artistically speaking, that if you want to make a great commercial album and do everything perfect and sell a lot of units or whatever, you may never break that leg. So that's a very cool story. It's a great song too, as well, and that makes the song even better.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and that was the other thing. We wanted an exciting little rock and roll song, and that it's going to be fun to play that live. We're going to be doing some shows soon. At the end of October, we're doing our live debut since the album came out, and we're doing it as a 4-piece band. No, actually a 6-piece band, but 4 players and then 2 people who are just there to sing. So that's another Todd influence. I remember he did that on the Faithful tour. Todd Rundgren would have like the 4-piece Utopia, but then they brought out 3 backup singers on the road with them in Europe. That was around 76 or 77. It was somewhere between that lineup and the Raw, the birth of the 4-piece Utopia, but it was that period with the Faithful album, so it was a transitional period in Todd's career.
Yeah, one of those guys was Luther Vandross.
Yeah, it was. That's right. And all those guys, I can't remember their names off the top of my head, the other guys, but they were all notable session singers who, if you look up their credits, they've all sang on everybody's record. I think notably that was an all-male backing band, too, all-male vocalists, so they were all basically just doing they were doing covers of Todd's voices, because that was Faithful, that was the album. But anyway, I think they were doing stuff from Initiation, too. But back to this thing, so we're going to have we're going to have 2 live backing vocalists, 1 woman and 1 man. And actually, one of the men is Alan, the producer. So Alan Clapp, who was there when we made the record and played, I think he sang on some of the tracks. Just when we were just trying to pad everything, we added at one point we just added some extra ahs and was like, "Get out there, Alan!" So he actually is on the album. I think he's credited. I'm not sure who he is. Just remember that. But what's cool is I've never been in a band where they have the luxury, because we're not really a full-time band. We can just present it the way we want to present it.
So I want to start to kind of wrap this up a little. I'm glad to hear you guys are playing live. I doubt you're going to get out. Are you going to get out to the East Coast? That'll be the first quick question.
Yeah, it's just really hard right now to figure out how to tour. I'll tell you a fantasy I have is that John and I, since we know all the songs and there's a record now, that we hire in various cities in North America where we have friends. Like, we have friends all over. Like, I lived in Vancouver, I've lived in Toronto, John's from D.C., John's also born in Los Angeles, and we both have friends in Los Angeles. So one of the ideas we had was that we would just go to, like, D.C. and use his old friends, who are still great players, and they would learn our album, and we would play with them as the band. And then we go to New York, where I know people, and then they become the band. And then we go to Toronto, where I have friends, and they become the band. In Vancouver, maybe even Seattle and Portland, we have friends there too. So I thought it'd be really good. It's kind of old school. I mean, Chuck Berry used to do that. Like that, they would tour, and then everywhere they go, they would just have a band for the night. But in this case, it'd be friends who could learn our record from our record. It'd be kind of. It's a fantasy, but I mean, even getting me and John to those cities is like expensive, and no one's paying for it. Unless we pre-sold the shows. I don't know. I'm so out of that idea of the live thing right now, but John's really into it, so maybe he'll make me interested in it.
Yeah, no, that'd be a very cool concept. I mean, I had some friends many years ago that got to do that with Bo Diddley, and it was it was a life-changing experience for them musically, just to be able to sit in like that. But there's a lot of great musicians out there that would certainly fit the bill. And that kind of rolls into my next question and sort of a wrap-up question. Toronto to San Francisco. I mean, I'm from the Buffalo area, so very familiar with Toronto, Canadian music scene and everything. How did you wind up going from Toronto to San Francisco, and regrets? Talk a little about that journey,
Toronto,
if you would.
Well, my wife got a job in San Francisco. I'd been here. My brother Mike, who we mentioned is an actor, my brother Mike had shot a movie called So I Married an Axe Murderer, which was he had basically written the treatment of the screenplay that the version of the screenplay that they shot originally was set in New York, and then Mike wrote it up to be San Francisco because he liked San Francisco. So I came to visit him when he was here shooting that, and I liked it. And then my wife got an offer to say, can you work for us in San Francisco? We'll pay for your relocation. And I was kind of at the end of a couple of bands in Toronto had broken up, and I was just starting to be a writer as well, and I can do that anywhere. I said, let's just go to San Francisco and see what happens. And we loved it. But then my visa ran out in San Francisco, and her job was running, like, she didn't really dig her job at that point. So we moved to Vancouver, Canada in 2001. Actually, we took a trip around Southeast Asia for 7 months, which was the best thing you could possibly have done. And it was really mind-blowing to go to Japan and all these places, and Vietnam and Cambodia and Thailand, and it was just really amazing. India, we went to India, was right to the bottom of India. And so then we moved to Vancouver after that, and Vancouver, Canada, because I'm Canadian, we're both Canadian, it was kind of nice to be able to work in a city that wasn't Toronto, because I'd grown up in Toronto, and I felt like I was getting stale in Toronto. So having been to San Francisco, it was nice to move to another West Coast place in Canada, on the coast, so it was still like the ocean, and the weirdest thing started happening. I got a book deal the minute I arrived, practically, and I had a book out anyway. So then Lisa started working. My wife started working for a TV show that was a national Canadian TV show, so she was a producer. Meanwhile, I'd been promoting my book on a radio show there, and they needed someone to fill in for one day after and I was really comfortable on air, and so they said, hey, why don't you host tomorrow? And so I hosted, and then I said, I would like to do this every day, thank you. And then they said, oh, well, you can do the afternoons show, Monday to Friday, 2 hours a day. And I was like, great. So I had the Paul Myers radio show in 2003, and suddenly I was doing TV as well. I was doing movie reviews for a cable show, and I was writing for the Georgia Strait. Everything was happening in Vancouver. Lisa was also working in publishing, and then the company she worked for, they were talking to me about book ideas, and then they said, have you ever heard of this guy Long John Baldry? And I said, oh yeah, I know about this guy, I know blah blah blah. And they said, well, we're looking for a writer to write the story of Long John Baldry because he lives in Vancouver and he just died here, and we know he's an English rock star from the 60s, and we wondered if you could write the story. And I said, yeah, I'll write the book. And so I ended up making this really detailed book about the history of the British blues movement, using John Baldry who was one of the leading unknown guys who started it. And that book kind of opened some doors for me in other places. But around this time, Lisa gets a job offer to work in San Francisco again. But this time we say, okay, we want green cards and eventual citizenship, because we're not going to move to San Francisco if we have to have it yanked out again,
Yeah.
So then we came back in 2006, and so we've been here ever since, and we just bought our first house in San Francisco. So, well, it's actually in Berkeley. So we're here for the long haul now. We're citizens, and I love this place in the world. I love California. I'm always going to be at heart and a Canadian by birth, but I really feel like a citizen of California right now. So.
Yeah, and I was just listening to an interview with Bob Weir from the 1980s talking about the San Francisco music scene. It was really funny. One of the great quotes was, he's like, people talk about the San Francisco sound. He said, but there is none, because pretty much you can do what you want here and everybody supports it, which is kind of cool.
That's true. I got to say that the group we're associated with in this town is Mystery Lawn Music, and it's Alan Clapp's label. And he has a studio out in San Bruno, up in the hills, and it's called the Mystery Lawn, or he calls it Mystery Mountain, Mystery Lawn Mountain. But Mystery Lawn as a label is filled with like bands that are kind of like chamber pop or power pop, or they're kind of like the kinds of indie Americana melodic rock bands that they're not top 40 bands, and they're not necessarily like hipster hard rock bands, but they just make music that it kind of exists as an art form, and I love that as a place to be for the Paul and John, like it's a nice stable to be in.
All right, well, very cool. Well, thank you so much, Paul. This, the third time's the charm, as they say. I learned a lot of great stuff. I learned about the origin of the Paul and John. We got to talk about one of our favorite artists together, Todd Rundgren, and I guess it just doesn't get any better than that. But on a personal note, and to anybody that's listening, I definitely recommend this album. I get a lot of stuff in the mail. I mean, I'm not a huge music writer by any stretch of the imagination. The newspaper I write for is a pretty modest circulation, but this is an album I really loved it. I just had a lot of fun with it. I'm glad we had a chance to chat with it, and I hope it does well. And if you land one of these into a movie or something, I'm going to smile, because I think this is stuff that really deserves to be heard.
Well, if you know anybody in the movie business, feel free to bootleg my record and send it to them.
I've got a cousin. Gavin O'Connor. He produced Miracle. I've never met him, but I know he's related. We just found out recently, so maybe that'll be our introduction.
Tell them this thing's ready to go we're ready to life. Anyone who can do that. I mean, Mike's got 3 copies and he's handing them out to people, and who knows, right?
Who knows? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly a brother who's done a few movies himself, maybe can get it landed somewhere, but certainly it's a great album, and it's available on iTunes, Amazon, and all the outlets that...
Best place to go is go to the Paul and John Bandcamp site. Just look for, at Bandcamp, look for Inner Sunset or the Paul and John, and you can order it there in limited vinyl. There's a 180-gram vinyl edition in a gatefold sleeve. There's also a CD edition and digital download. But if you just want a digital download, you can get it from there, or you can get it from iTunes or eMusic or Amazon Digital. So.
All right. Well, very good. And again, I want to thank you, and I'm sure our paths will cross again.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time.
Warm by coffee stimulation, and get this day switched on sooner than you think it will be gone. This is not